I would so much like this to be fiction, that it was only in my head. When there is a family loss like that, when someone decides they can't take it anymore, the reaction of distant relatives outside the immediate circle is to think that the family had something to do with it, that the family could have done something to prevent it. It happened to us suddenly, only that my mother's family never practically stopped worrying about us. Since the funeral, my mother never told them what was happening, and let's be realistic. Only for a moment think about it and answer with all sincerity. You would do it. You would ask to help a person or a family if there is a spirit tormenting them at home and in solitude. That thing with the appearance of a girl seemed to get stronger. It began to now resemble my sister, who he became her favorite person to bother. Somehow that entity went through my sister's things. We returned from eating at my father's friend's house to find my sister's diary open, with letters and memories thrown all over the house. With one of her dolls in my dad's room, things that were well stored in my sister's closet had been taken out and appeared dirty all over the house. My sister cried desperately while we helped her rearrange everything. My dad went to the downstairs for a broom and dustpan to lift some glass, and he came back pale. He came back with my sister's first communion dress in his arms. In the darkness of the living room, he said he saw the dress floating upright as if someone was carrying it since. When I turned on the light, the dress was already on the floor with a penetrating, horrible smell of putrefaction. I want to clarify that we are not changing house. It is something that we cannot afford. That is even out of the question, especially because it is my mother's house. The house where we grew up, and we are not going to leave it because this filth has decided to live here. It is not going to win us over. It is not going to take away more of what we have already lost. Pray, bless, clean the house. My sister and my mom had already noticed it. When they got too scared and started praying to this thing, they seemed to have fun. It seemed to take advantage of it to make fun of them, even though we never thought it would solve anything. And Dad spoke to a priest, a very close friend of mine, of the family. My mother accepted that the priest came, but reluctantly they came to bless the house. Obviously in Europe, I don't explain well what was happening, and I guess the father thought it was more about dealing with the loss of a loved one, and perhaps the priest omitted to explain that it was the place where he decided to take his life. He arrived accompanied by an elderly Doa Carmen who helped him with the work of the church. He walked around the house throwing blessings in Spanish, some in Latin, and left that same night very late. The next day in the afternoon there was a knock on the door. We were surprised to see that it was Doa Carmen. She asked us to come in, and we bought her a coffee. She asked us to be honest and tell her what was really happening in the house. And I think it was the first time we were really honest with someone outside the family. The first time we were honest about it. Doa Carmen inspired us so much confidence, and she really showed us to believe that we ended up in tears, telling her absolutely everything that had happened. The girl couldn't stop laughing at 3 in the morning. Mrs. Carmen left for her house, and even though my father offered to take her, she refused. They have to be strong and take care of each other now more than ever, he told us. The next morning, religious figures and a man who was already very old, but who gave us a calm that we really needed, showed up with holy water. He was a retired priest, and Doa Carmen had been aware of the situation. The man was very concerned that this thing that lives in my house could have physically stopped the door on that occasion while my mother was dying. I have seen too many things in my life, and many of them I still do not understand, he told us. I believe in God, and I have seen his faith and among us, in many beings who came escaping from hell. He stayed all day. We went out for most of the afternoon and returned at night. He was still in the house, very exhausted, and told us that at this point he no longer had the strength to face such a being, despite his promise to return to the house every month to bless it, to try to free it from those forces, from those things, as many times as possible. Necessary. After 3 days we were in peace for 3 days until the others arrived. We tried to go out as much as possible. We even visited friends of my father whom we had not seen for years, some with whom I am sure he did not even get along as well, and on one of these visits my dad received a call. It was a neighbor. Something was happening at home. I received a text message from my uncle, my mother's brother, who has a small restaurant a few blocks from my house. He asked us to we went there immediately. When we got home we found what seemed to be all the neighbors on the street outside our house, which was with the doors open with all the lights on and shadows walking through the windows. A few hours before, horrible screams began to come out of my house. Desperate screams of pain and others of laughter and full of vulgarities. The neighbors came out of their houses to approach, but no one dared to enter. Someone called the police. One more neighbor ran out to the restaurant for my uncle to tell him that something was happening with us. Or at least that's what they thought when they arrived and heard the screams. He broke one of the windows without hesitation and entered. He got lost in the darkness while the neighbors watched from outside. The screams fell silent a little afterwards, but he did not come out. Minutes later, two municipal police patrols arrived, alerted by the neighbors. They forced the door to enter. They found my uncle unconscious and gave him first aid. When we arrived, the neighbors were milling around the small entrance to the garden, and my uncle was receiving care in an ambulance. The shadows that we saw through the windows were of at least 3 agents who were checking the entire house from top to bottom. When my uncle saw us, he approached us and hugged us like he hadn't in a long time. He hugged us tightly. He told us that he came to look for us and the house was much darker than it would be normal despite it being a full moon night. Inside you couldn't see anything at all. The lights didn't turn on. He ran to the second floor from where the screams came from, and they're right at the entrance to my grandmother's room, barely illuminated by the light from the window at the end of the hallway. A girl with an old woman's face, smiling from ear to ear. The girl was holding her hand to a very tall woman, a naked woman with her skin falling off her body. He didn't believe what he saw and tried to turn on the lamp on his cell phone. By the time he did, no one could be seen at the door. He tried to run down, but something hit him in his stomach. He had come across something, although he had it in front of him, he couldn't see it. The darkness was as if he had his eyes closed. He thought it had been a piece of furniture and extended his hands to touch it. He felt a hard, wet ball. Then he felt somehow many hairs on her and skin falling at the touch of his fingers. Something moved, something laughed, and he felt the girl's laughter in his hands as he held her head. The next thing he remembers, the next thing he saw was a police officer trying to revive him. I had never seen him like this, and not even at the funeral could we see so much sadness and feeling. My uncle cried while he told us what happened as a child. My dad asked him if those screams were terrifying. Why the hell had he dared to enter our house in the dark to look for us, instead of waiting for the police? He told us because one of the voices shouting was my mother's.